And the other thing I'd just like to touch on quickly is, as we've talked about a little bit already, ecological civilization, because it's been one of Xi Jinping's key themes over the course of the last 10 years, and they've really doubled down on it at this Congress. And actually, I think it's important to talk about it because it's such a kind of crying shame that more of the Western left doesn't cotton on to what's going on in China in relation to combating climate breakdown. And promoting biodiversity, tackling pollution, and so on. And actually, what China's rolling out in a massive way is kind of what the kind of radical fringe elements of the left have been calling for, which is a completely comprehensive Green New Deal. And there was a really nice quote in an interview with the Marxist ecologist John Bellamy Foster, where he says, "While China has made moves to implement its radical conception of ecological civilization, which is built into state planning and state regulation, the notion of a Green New Deal has taken concrete form nowhere in the West. It's just a slogan at this point without any real political backing within the system. It was talked about by progressive forces and then rejected by the powers that be." So that's the West. Meanwhile, in China, you've got Xi saying at a party congress, "Nature provides the basic conditions for human survival and development. We will protect nature and the environment as we do our very own lives." And they've talked many times about never again allowing the needs of economic growth to go in front of the needs of humanity's future and the planet's future. Obviously, China's made its historic contribution to reach zero carbon by 2060, to reach peak carbon emissions before 2030. And these are extremely significant commitments. And if they achieve them, which history would tend to indicate they will, because the Chinese are in the habit of meeting their commitments and keeping their promises, then that will be by far the fastest that any country has gone from industrial revolution to peak carbon to zero carbon, like far and away. China's already become, as you've mentioned earlier on our conversation, unquestioned world leader in renewable energy. It's responsible for fully a third of all renewable investment globally. It's estimated that worldwide there are 11 million jobs in the renewable energy industry, and over 4 million of those are in China. Meanwhile, China's carrying out the largest reforestation campaign in the world. Just 40 years ago, in 1980, China's its forest coverage was 12% of the country, and now it's 24% of the country, which is incredible and unprecedented progress. And you can compare that with the situation in Brazil, for example. So, the Congress has really strongly affirmed this idea of ecological civilization, which is very much like the Green New Deal, with the important difference that it's actually happening. It actually has political support across the board, and it's taking place on a more or less unimaginable scale.
Yeah, I mean, it really is incredible seeing what China is doing right now in terms of fighting climate change, especially when you compare it to Western governments, and particularly the US government, where there are still many US politicians, including former President Trump, who deny that climate change is real. Trump called it like a Chinese conspiracy. And this is also, it's easy to make fun of, knuckle dragging Republicans, but Democrats aren't really doing much either to combat climate change. And in Europe, it's basically the same. There are very few politicians in Europe, Macron, whoever prime minister is going to be next week in Britain, or a month from now, because it seems like it's going to change every few months. They're doing nothing basically to combat climate change. And in the report that she gave to the party Congress, there's an entire section that talks about pursuing green development and promoting harmony between humanity and nature. And they have very, important commitments here in terms of pollution control, ecological conservation, cutting carbon emissions, reducing pollution, expanding green development. And the reason they can do that, of course, is because they talk about coordinated industrial restructuring. That is to say, state-led coordinated industrial redevelopment and restructuring. So the reason they can do that is because China has a socialist model in which the state leads the economic development of the country, as opposed to the capitalist model in the West, especially in the United States, but also in Europe and many other parts of the world, where corporations determine what state policy is.